Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Arundhati. It's lovely to see so many friends back again. We realized in these difficult times, many of you are helping, supporting family members, friends, neighbors. But we at IFA are glad that you were able to manage some time to come and join us for this. As some of you know, India Foundation for the Arts is an independent organization that supports and implements projects in arts and culture across the country. We are 25 years old and have in this time supported about 670 projects and made them possible. But as important as supporting projects, we feel that taking these projects, their outcomes, the discussions and conversations around them to a larger public to make that outreach possible is also very much part of our core work. We want stakeholders and audiences of different kinds, students, homemakers, professionals, media, artists, scholars, researchers, to be able to listen to these projects and learn from them, but also get ideas probably of what they might want to do in the arts and culture. Since last year, after COVID hit us, we were unable to take the outreach events to the different cities and towns that across the country that we would earlier. And we opted to go online and share this with you. While at one end, this opened up possibilities of our audience members, friends, supporters from across the world to actually join us, it did bring in limitations of technology that we all understand. The ups and downs of how our technological facilities that some of us being privileged have can also mar the experience of these arts and cultural presentations. So at the very beginning of even today's journey, I would say, please do have patience with us because it's not always in our control what happens to the technology through which we are actually coming to you. So we are back again. Last year, we did a series of showcases online, project showcases. And we took a little gap in between and we are back again in this new financial year. This is the first one that we are going with. And we are very happy because the first one happens to be a very special project that has to do with Bangalore, that has to do with women, and that has to do with dance. A couple of things before I pass this on to my colleague Suman to tell you a little more about the program and the project and the wonderful person, artist who's going to present this to you. A few house rules. We, as you know, there is chat. Actually, by now everybody knows how Zoom works, but I'll still say that because some of our Facebook audiences have also joined us. So you have a little chat where you can put in your comments, you can discuss something if you want to, but on the Zoom app, you will also see a Q&A. Now, through the presentation, you can put in your questions there, and at the end of the presentations, we'll pick them up for responses. If you're watching this on Facebook and you do have a question, please put it under the comments, post below the video. And we have one of our team members watching out, and they will pass the questions to us. So that's how we are going to do this evening. And thank you once again for joining us. I pass this on to my colleague Suman, who will tell you a little more. Suman, over to you.
Thank you, Arundhati. Let me now introduce you to the speaker of the evening, Gayathri Iyer. Gayathri received a grant from IFA under our Project 560 program, and which was supported by Citi India. Now, Project 560 is quite different from all the other programs at IFA because it is city specific. In fact, the title of this program, Project 560, is inspired by Bangalore's PIN code 560. So today we are really happy to have Gayatri here to speak about her project that is connected with Bangalore. And in fact, this project, Project 560, offers opportunities for people from the city to research and tell stories about the city itself. So in Gayatri's grant enabled her to create a performance, Sundara, And it also helped her to write a research paper on the life and times of this dancer who was part of the courtesan community and was in fact connected very closely with the Alsuru Someshwara temple at the turn of the 18th century. She was a multi-talented woman, and in fact, she even wrote a book. So you're going to hear much more about her this evening. Gayatri, in fact, in her presentation, will talk about the creation of Sundara and also the life of the dancer and the times she lived in. She will also talk about what attracted her to this amazing person and the research that went into the performance that she made, as well as some of the challenges that she faced during the process of making the performance. Gayatri herself is a Bharatanatyam dancer, and in fact, she came to India, I think, at the age of 19 in search of dance. So she is currently pursuing a PhD from JNU, and she's also interested in the synergetic kind of relationship between performance spaces and dance. Gayatri also teaches dance, and I think what she teaches is hugely informed by her ongoing research. So, Gayatri, I'm very happy it's my great pleasure, in fact, to invite you to present, a long forgotten slice of Bangalore's history through your protagonist, the dancer, Venkatasundara Sani. So, over to you now, Gayatri.
Thank you, Suman, for such a kind introduction. And, my relationship with the IFA family has been nothing but wonderful over these past 3 years. So my first thank you of the evening will be to the IFA and to the wonderful people who have helped me to put this project together. On that note, let me share my presentation. Can everyone see? So when we think about Bangalore and Bangalore's history, there's so many things that come to us. But before I get into any of those things, I'd like to start by telling my story, because I think what Sundara actually became was a convergence of my story and the story of Venkatasundara Sani. So right off the bat, I was coming into Bangalore first and foremost as an outsider. I moved to the city at the age of 19, and I had no previous allegiance to Bangalore. I did, however, have grounded training in Bharatanatyam, and that training came from the sincerity and the commitment of my mother, who comes from an illustrious family of musicians and dancers, and who made sure that I was learning Bharatanatyam even though we were staying overseas. And she is also the production manager for this show. So everything you see in terms of the visual aesthetics, the sonic aesthetics, is greatly influenced by her eyes and her ears as well. So I'd like to acknowledge her right off the bat. So I talk about my family because I think it's important to acknowledge my privilege at the beginning of this presentation right off the bat. I come from a family, my mother's side of the family was all from Kumbakonam. They're from the seat of sort of art and culture. All of them were trained musicians. Pictured here is my great aunt, Lalita Venkatraman, who retired as the principal of the Mysore Music College. And I was entrenched in a sort of dance and music culture ever since my childhood, that really became the basis of all of the future research interests that I would have. And as I sort of began to grow up and understand dance a little bit better, I realized that I was not going to gain much from studying it from a distance. And so therefore I made the very difficult decision to move back to India at the age of 19. I know some of my college classmates are in on this call. So I would like to thank them for making my transition a lot easier than it would have been otherwise. And one of the things I did when I came back to India is I started reading copious amounts of theory and history in terms of dance. and dance sculpture. And I became obsessed in a way with the temple space because I felt the temple space had all the answers. It was really the meeting point and the convergence of flesh and stone. And till this day, that sensibility is what informs my research. And Sundara actually came about because I was thinking about why we never hear about Bharatanatyam in Bangalore. We always, whenever we talk about Bharatanatyam, everybody talks about Tamil Nadu. Whenever we talk about Kuchipudi, we talk about Andhra Pradesh. But where was Bharatanatyam in the larger scenography of the history of dance? And why is it that nobody talks about it? And when I started doing the digging, to my surprise, it was because some of the most important voices that were instrumental in the evolution of Bharatanatyam history were marginalized. And they were marginalized because there were voices of women, but more importantly, voices of courtesans who were both being judged at the time for their moral character as well as for their profession. And they end up being, not just in Bangalore, but across India, some of the most important voices in history. So at this juncture, I started reading a lot more about Bangalore and trying to find more information. And of course, I'm from the world of academia, so I started thinking that I would write a paper about it. And my Project 560 grant, as Suman mentioned, supports two kind of sub-projects. The first project was the research paper. So I'm deeply thankful to the Dance Studies Association for acknowledging my research on Venkatasundara Sani and allowing me to present it for the first time at Northwestern University in Chicago in 2019, back when traveling was still a thing. And it was because of their support and their generous travel grant that I was actually able to take Venkatasundara Sani's story overseas. So that was the first part of this project, which I will not be addressing in this presentation, but I just wanted to make you all aware of it. It has been presented, this research has been presented in several other conferences across the world. But more importantly, my question was, who is Venkatasundara Sani and how can I find her story? So I found her because of two very random references. The first one was in the great scholar Davesh Soneji's seminal work, Unfinished Gestures. And he sort of mentions her in a line or two. And he says, no, there was this Devadasi that lived in Bangalore and she wrote this book and et cetera, et cetera. And the second, of course, all of us as historians and scholars are familiar with, which is the work of B.L. Rice. And these two sort of throwaway references were enough for me to get really curious about Venkatasundara Sani and her story. So I began doing the digging, and I said, when you go to other cities like Chennai, for example, you are completely confronted by how central these dancing figures were to not just the evolution of the city, but the evolution of art within those cities. So Mylapore Gauri Ammal emerges as a very important figure. She's somebody who has taught Rukmini Devi Arundel for some amount of time. She's somebody who's taught Bala Saraswati for some amount of time. She becomes this really sort of iconic figure for the Bharatanatyam Reformation movement. And similarly, Madurantakam Jagadambal becomes such an important figure in Chennai. Where are these women in Bangalore? And as I dug and I dug and I dug, I have to thank the kind people over at the SOAS postcard project for sharing some of their images with me. And I started finding these postcard images of these stunning dancing women. And while it says Madras dancing girl here on the postcard, if you actually look at her sari, it is from Karnataka. This we know definitively was shot at Del Toro Studios in Bangalore. So this was a dancing or a depiction of a dancing girl that would have been kind of based or kind of conventional of the Bangalore landscape. And I started finding these images, and one image after the next, each more stunning than the previous, of these women who are large-bodied women, confident women, and who are decked in all of this period jewelry and all these period saris that I was not able to find in the market. I was not able to kind of find anything similar to what they were wearing, nor was I able to find a dance that was similar to what they were doing. And this particular picture was taken in Cubbon Park, I believe, and ends up overlapping with the time that would have been contemporaneous with Venkatasundara Sani's life. So I would dare to postulate that the image on the far left, this woman, might have been an older version of Venkatasundara Sani. We don't know. I don't know. But it's always nice to throw out that possibility. So before we understand the kind of dance that Venkatasundara Sani does, we have to understand the kind of dance that really existed in the early 1900s in Bangalore. So all of it, largely, all of the Bharatanatyam that's performed in this region is largely referred to as the Mysore Bani, because Mysore really became the seat of culture, especially at that period of time. And the Mysore Bani has 4 subsections. There's the Kolar Bani, the Kolar, I guess the subsect, you could say, the Mysore, the Nanjangud, and the Muguru. Unfortunately, no one of the Muguru style, as far in my research, as far as I know, survives to communicate the history and authenticity of the tradition. There are a few students here and there, but those who practice the Muguru style, unfortunately, are not familiar with the history of it. So I focused on the Kolar, Mysore, and the Nanjangud styles, and I will have to thank the 3 beautiful women who you see on your screen. The expert in the Kolar style is Dr. Padmini Sridhar, who is a student of the great Radha Krishna ji, who is a descendant of the hereditary dancing family of Kolar. In the middle, many of you will recognize Dr. Lalita Srinivasan. She's no stranger to the Bangalore dance circles. And on the right, Dr. Mala Shashikant, who was the premier disciple of V.S. Kaushik of the hereditary dancing family of Nanjangud. And these women have largely helped me to understand of course, the rules of the Mysore Bani, but also what the sensibility, what the body logic is with which you dance in the Mysore school. Now we know that the Kolar, the Kolar Bani, or what is referred to largely as the Kolar Parampara, would have been popular not just in Kolar, but also in Bangalore. So most of what we see is informed by the Kolar and Mysore styles, and a little bit less by the Nanjangud style. So who was Venkatasundara Sani? So after I figured out what kind of dance she was doing, I had to really learn more about her. And unfortunately, I was not able to find, despite copious amounts of digging for almost 2 to 3 years, was not able to find a birth date or a death date. But through her text, I learned that not only she was fluent in multiple languages, she was trained in multiple types of art forms, but it is possible because of the date of the text that she was managed by Kolar Kitana, who was one of the main Natuanars, one of the main teachers of the Devadasis of the Kolar style. So he was managing, legend has it, 300 dancers at a time. So she was attached to the Alsur Someshwara temple. Now this temple, this photograph is a photograph that was taken in the 1900s. So of course the temple looks very different today. It's colored and it has it has like a parking area in front and whatnot. but it was interesting for me to try and find archival images of Bangalore at that time, so that I really got a sense of what the geography looked like when Venkatasundara Sani was alive. The text that she wrote, and of course, these are all technical details, but I'm just glazing over them. The text that she wrote was called the Rasika Jana Manolasani. It is also known as the Sarasangraha Bharata Shastra. And unfortunately, there are no physical copies that survive outside of the Mysore Palace Library, which you would need to know someone from the royal family to access. Uh, but what's interesting about the book is that it dates to 1908, and it really talks about the range of Indian art. So it starts with the art of poetry making, it goes into dramaturgy, it goes into music, and then the last chapter that we have with us that survives is about dance. So one of the things that I did in putting the actual production together is to really study that last chapter and figure out what codes Venkatasundara Sani was prescribing for her dancing, and how to incorporate those codes into the production itself. And now she does draw greatly from the Natya Shastra, but she also draws greatly from other texts, including the Abhinaya Darpana, and she annotates and adds her own sort of meanings. So it was very interesting for me to employ a more almost literal and less symbolic manner of Abhinaya, because those are the nature of codes that she prescribes. One of my biggest challenges in approaching Sundara, again, this project took 3 years to put together, is tuning my own body. I began dancing at the age of 4, and my first guru was the late great actress Padmini, and the aesthetic of her body was so naturally graceful and so naturally beautiful. But before I could truly imbibe it, unfortunately, she passed away. She passed away when I was at a very impressionable age. And I ended up continuing my dance training with a dancer from the Kalakshetra tradition, and ended up continuing with gurus from the Kalakshetra tradition throughout. So my body developed a sort of natural rigidity and a harsh geometry and symmetry that simply wasn't working with an older style of dance, or maybe a more, I mean, I hesitate to use the word authentic, but a more traditional aesthetic, let's say. So one of the things I did, and in my many conversations with Dr. Padmini Sridhar and Dr. Lalita Srinivasan, both of them had mentioned to me that Odissi was so integral, the influence of Odissi was so integral to the Mysore Bani. And it's even indicated by the hand gestures. So, normal Bharatanatyam dancers, they hold their waist with the wrist turned in. In the Nanjangud, Mysore, and Kolar styles sometimes, they hold their hand, the wrist like this, which is a very Odissi sort of practice. So even something as tiny as that, to the way the body is held, through the incorporation of Tribanga into many of the repertoire pieces of the Kolar Bani, it was imperative that I shake my body of that rigid geometry for the production to be convincing. And so one of the first things I did is I started learning Odissi. And I'm so grateful to Dr. Kumkum Lal in Delhi, who so generously took me under her wing and taught me the basics, even though my body was so tuned to a completely different style of dancing. When I started learning how to move my torso and my hips, things became a lot easier. But one of the other things which I also had to be acutely aware of is the fact that the dance of Venkatasundara Sani was the dance of the temple. It was the dance of Alsur Someshwara. And therefore, it was important to keep the aesthetics of the temple in mind as well. In my research, I learned that dancing women, the courtesans who danced in front of the Garbhagriha, would not lift their feet lift their legs, in the way that we do for our Nataraja posture, you lift the leg. That would not have been done in front of the Sanctum Sanctorum, because it appears as though you're kicking God in the face. Similarly, very, very deep squats that were not in costume were not done. And the entire manner of dancing was also a bit more vestibular, but in a way that the circular space of the Ardhamantapa was surrounded by a vestibule. So it was like a circle in a square in many ways. So all of those aesthetic considerations also had to be incorporated in understanding how to use the body in space. And then, of course, the last thing, which is really important when you look at the archival images, is that the dancing bodies of the early 1900s have nothing to do aesthetically with the dancing bodies today. It was important that I maintained and carried a larger body so that I was able to master the aesthetics that and the way of carrying weight that would have informed the dance of these women. And of course, it is not without backlash that these sort of projects happen. I am fully aware of the fact that entering this project itself was extremely problematic. One, because I come from, as reiterated earlier, an extreme amount of privilege, but also because I didn't want to seem at any level that I was appropriating the voice of a certain character from history whose story I didn't have the right to tell. But at the same time, the sincerity with which I approach my work was called into question several times. Despite, obviously, despite the finest of academic language and the most eloquent of explanations. And I do respect the fact that those from the community have felt that their voices have been erased. But I have also questioned my privilege to a point where I understand that it's important for me at this point in my life and my career to amplify voices in history that have been marginalized, rather than sit and marinate, I suppose, in my own privilege and not take any action. So that was definitely an integral part of this. There was backlash from both communities. When I had first advertised for the show, there were many people from my own community who had asked me why it is that I'm taking this project up. But I guess the nature of good research is always polarizing. The music traditions of the production were integral. They were so important, because we weren't just, again, talking about the music that was important to the dance. It was the music that was important to the temple. And I am so thankful to my research assistant, Rukmini Swaminathan, who is also now an IFA grantee in her own right, but at the time was working with me. And Rukmini and I went to the homes of, I think, 12 or 15 Nadaswaram and tabla players in Bangalore to understand what the tradition of Bangalore was. Because most of what we have documented is the courtly tradition of Mysore. We actually don't know much about the temple traditions of Bangalore. So we went to these homes of these artists, and two things became very clear right away. One is the lack of government support for their work. But second, and most important, how intricate the Nadaswaram and Taval tradition really is when executed with the intention that it was designed. And so one of the things we did is we sat and we looked at how the tradition itself is so temporal. It starts where you have a certain ragam in the morning, and then after the sun comes up, there's only a certain ragam to be played. And after that, and each ritual, each moment of the day was codified through music. but the great contribution of Bangalore was to add on multilingual kirtanas and in some cases padams to the temple repertoire to reflect the cosmopolitan nature of the city. So the city itself is reflected in the music, which was a very, very exciting revelation. And I'm so thrilled that I got to work with the greatest Nadaswaram and Taval artists in Bangalore, Mr. Rajkumar, Sri Lakshman, and Sri Murali. And I knew that through my research, the Mallari was the central piece of the Nadaswaram repertoire and tradition. And it was imperative that I perform the Mallari. But I knew that the Mallari performed in dance today that has, especially in Bharatanatyam, that has nritta elements and that has a spatial choreography to it, was actually a development that took place after 1921, after Chevalier Muthuswami Pillai actually adapted the Nadaswaram Mallari for Bharatanatyam for the proscenium stage. And this became a huge controversy because when I had approached the first musician that I had approached, and I kind of told the person that I was doing this project about the courtesan tradition and I wanted to perform a Mallari, this artist actually misunderstood that I would be dancing a contemporary Mallari and dropped out of the project because they felt that it was not an accurate representation of the tradition. So what I decided to do is use the Mallari as a soundscape, as a soundtrack, as a background music to depict the procession of the temple into the audience, essentially. So that actually ended up being a really interesting choice choreographically. The textile tradition for Sundara, it was really important that we got the look and feel of the character exactly right. And the reason for that is because I wanted her to look like she had come to life from an archival image, but not as a caricature, not as a cartoon, but as somebody who really would have just walked out of the temple and onto the stage. And so getting the textile design right was really crucial. One of the things that we realized as we poured over images, and I'm really, really thankful again that I had my mother's eye available to me because my mom's family at some point was also involved in talking to weavers and in the distribution of silk saris. And so she was able to help me to not only identify motifs that would be easy to explain to the weaver, but also to identify material and drape that would have been most authentic. And the one thing we realized as we poured over these archival images is that the design that was in vogue for dancing women was the use of contrast stripes and large borders with very minimal ornamentation. And the drape that I utilized was a drape that came from the temple dancing tradition of Odissi, which was actually used by several dancers in the Mysore court for sure. So again, we have that interaction with Odissi here. I came across the image on the left is actually an image of the late, great Bala Saraswati's performance costume and one of her performance costumes. And it was put up in an exhibition by the Museum of Performing Arts in Chennai. And I saw the costume and I fell in love with it because it spoke to me in the way that archival images were speaking to me. If you look at the image on the right, of course, it's a cotton sari, it's not a silk one, but you can see the kind of resonance of the contrast stripes and how that aesthetic would have possibly even highlighted the curves and the movement of the dancing body. And I said, okay, I've got to make this happen, but it's not in vogue. So we traveled to Adani and to Kanchipuram. We spoke to Mr. Banumurthy, who's pictured here on the right, who's just the most wonderful person. He's a national award-winning weaver, but so patient and so kind and so cooperative in making me understand the limitations also of the loom. And when I went and I spoke to him, we tried to explain the design to him. He said, first it was, not possible. And then he introduced us actually to a larger collective of weavers. And so we worked with multiple weavers to actually get the textile tradition exactly right. And what resulted was simply stunning. It was something beyond what I could imagine. The contrast stripes and the really traditional border ended up creating a beautiful aesthetic on stage. And this is, of course, only one of the costumes. The jewelry, and this is kind of the last section of this presentation. The jewelry was, again, really important because I knew that courtesans as a community were extremely wealthy at the time. And they were in positions of power, and several of the pieces they owned were gifts from royalty, but several were actually commissioned by them. And as I was kind of poring over what the jewelry traditions of Bangalore are, I came across this lovely piece, which was in Ganjam's, I think it was a catalog or a book that they had published to celebrate, so many years of making jewelry. And they had explained what the Makarakanti is. And of course, those of us who are academics know that we have the tremendous work of Usha Balakrishnan to draw from. And as I studied the Makarakanti, so Makara meaning crocodile, Kanti meaning neck, so it's the crocodile's neck would be here. As I kind of kept exploring this tradition, I realized that many members of the royal family would actually commission these Makarakantis. And as I kept hunting for Makarakantis in the dance tradition, I came across this image from Davesh Soneji's book, Unfinished Gestures, where there's this wonderful, wonderful image of a Devadasi, Tiruvadai Maradur Nagalakshmi, who is wearing this distinctive sort of necklace, which looked to me like a Makarakanti. And I took that image and I went to the kind folks at Krishna Shetty, who showed me this piece, which was an estate piece which dates back to, I think, the same time Venkatasundara Sani would have been alive, around 1915 or so, 1912 to 1915. And what was very interesting about this piece is it had this wonderful Shaivite imagery. It had the Linga, it had the Nandi, it had the Ganesha, it had the Trishula, it had the Damaru, etc. And the stunning part of this piece is that, yes, it had all this Shaivite iconography in the Makarakanti, but if you turned it over, it was all etched. And I looked at this piece, and of course, it's made of uncut rubies and diamonds and pure gold. I said, this is definitely not in my production budget. Who can I go to who will make this for me? And I went to a lovely gentleman, Mr. Jiva, who actually makes the jewelry for the Ekambareswara temple in Kanchipuram. And he recreated this piece for me exactly. And if you turn it over, you can actually also see the etching. But if you want to do that, you'll have to come home because I don't have a picture of the back. So you're welcome to come home and see it. And this is how it ended up looking on stage. It really elevated the aesthetic of the entire production. And of course, I have spoken about the repertoire, but I will sort of quickly talk about it again. The Ashtadikpala Pushpanjali, which I performed, was something that was already part of Venkatasundara Sani's book. She had mentioned right up until the foot movements, the mudras and the postures that were to be employed. And what was brilliant about that is that it correlated almost directly with some of the steps that Dr. Padmini Sridhar had demonstrated to me. So I got a chance to put two and two together, the practice of the Kolar tradition, which is still living, and the theoretical description of dance in the book There was actually a correlation there, which was super exciting. And of the Malari, of course, I've talked about, but I also wanted to make sure that we understand that Venkatasundara Sani was the wife of Lord Someshwara. And when you're somebody's wife, you have a closeness with them that nobody else has. So a lot of the pieces I chose, including Padams and Javalis, implied that sort of closeness to divinity, where the character, where Venkatasundara Sani is addressing Lord Shiva as you did this, you did that, you are like this. And I felt that closeness and that relationship was very, very important. But none of this would be possible without my stellar team. It took an entire village to put this production together. So I have a lot of people to thank. I ask that you bear with me. The first person I would really like to thank is Dr. Thirumal of Surana College, who is a Sanskrit scholar and a Kannada scholar, and sat with me and pored over the Rasika Janam Manolasani for months together. And both of us, with my knowledge of the Natya Shastra and his knowledge of Sanskrit and Kannada, actually pieced together chunks of the text where we understood what Venkata was trying to say, which was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. My gratitude, my sincere gratitude to Dr. Vijay Lakshmi Subramaniam, who actually lent recordings of excavated items from Tanjavur that were unpublished anywhere else, so that my team could actually replicate some of the repertoire. And Dr. Yashoda Thakur, who is a representative of the courtesan community, the Kalavantalu community in Andhra Pradesh, who helped me to sensitively guide the political presentation and my own relationship, my own motivations in doing this project. My wonderful Nadaswaram and Taval team, who I've already mentioned, Sri Rajkumar, Sri Lakshman, and Sri Murali. Sri Murali is the temple Nadaswaram artist at the Tirupati Devasthana here in Malleshwaram. Sri Lakshman has traveled the world with his Nadaswaram and Taval, and so has Sri Rajkumar, with him. And you can just see, this was the setup of the stage, and you can see the temple pillars in the back and these artists in the front. It's almost an eerie image in terms of how it brought that entire tradition to life. My wonderful, wonderful musicians, of course, this is me giving them some quick notes before the show. Anantashri, Anjani, and Yashwant. Anantashri on vocal, Anjani on veena, and Yashwant on mridangam, who really understood the sensitivity of the music and brought it to life. The wonderful theater artists, Lavanya, Krishna, and Kush Kanted, who really made the production something that everybody could understand. And of course, on the right there, the cutest Reshma Chakrapani, who plays a young Sundara, and you'll see it in the clip that I'm going to be showing momentarily. And my entire team, I'm just going to read off names because they all deserve to be mentioned. Bianca, Archana, Lakshmi, Prabhava, Pragati, who did the behind the scenes video, Ved, Pragadishwar, Veena, Ishika, Janavi, Preet, B. Charles on the lights, Kavita and Chandrakala auntie backstage with my mother. And of course, thanks to Dr. Meera Iyer and Jyoti Raghuram for being the chief guests. And of course, for Deepa Ganesh ma'am for believing in this project enough to put the IFA's weight behind it. And on that note, I would like to show a quick clip, and then I will take any questions that you may have.
Shiva, 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 Yanada, Ori, Bayaba, Talana, Chukura, Shiva, 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 Yanada.
Okay. So thank you so much. And thanks again for having me. This was wonderful. And I'm open to any questions you may have.
Hi, Gayatri. Thanks so much for this presentation. It's opened up just so many ways for us to look at this piece of history, this piece of heritage. So before I go to the audience questions, I had one question from an IFA team member and one from me. So I'll begin with that. You spoke a lot about the retuning of the body that you had to do.
Yeah.
I was wondering about the retuning of psychology. Absolutely. And how did you have to mentally prepare yourself?
Yeah.
Given that this is a courtesan's mind also, which is dancing.
Right.
And given that, the comment that came to you from the community that it's an upper caste body. So you're also dealing with a certain backlash while you're preparing, knowing that the backlash will be there. So just a little bit about how an artist prepares the mind.
I feel like any artist will tell you this, that you could say something about me, I'd be okay. If you said something about my art, it's like saying something about my child. I really struggle with it. And when there was backlash from the community and backlash from my own community as well, there was a few days I couldn't dance in the middle. And I felt that I couldn't find my footing. I didn't know what was going to come of this whole project. I said, why am I even doing this? It's not even my story to tell. But I think what's really important, and I say this in the preface to the production as well, is, look, I would love for a courtesan from the Telugu Naidu community to come forward, do her PhD in dance studies, and tell this story in a way that it deserves to be authentically told. Until then, I will do the work of documentation. I see myself as a cog in the wheel. And so it's important psychologically also to understand, I am tuning my body. I am trying to understand, because it's my personal journey with my art. And as much as the project has a larger significance in history and has had a larger reception also, it's important to segregate the function of the art and my role as an artist in creating that art. It was hard because, little things like, your dance teacher would say, keep your elbow up, keep this straight, keep that straight. And then all of a sudden you have to say, no, relax the body, be more natural. So those kind of things there was a lot of unlearning to do. But it was the greatest and most rewarding experience of my life. So
thanks, Gayatri. A question from the audience is that, thank you for a very interesting and informative presentation. One thing I missed was a discussion of the caste of the Devdasi. Right. So how much of your work dealt with the caste of the Devdasi and thereby the context within which the Devdasi found themselves? I mean, I know you wrote a lot about it in the proposal as well.
I did.
We all had read the proposal. So maybe if you can touch upon that a little bit.
So one of the things which I had, a problem with, which is what I had mentioned earlier in this presentation as well, is that whenever we thought about Bharatanatyam, everybody would say, oh, Bharatanatyam has come from the IFA community of Tamil Nadu, full stop. And I said, that can't be the case. There have to be multiple Bharatanatyams for us to be practicing it all over South India. And when I came to the study of Bangalore, I realized that the Telugu Naidu community, the Telugu Naidu community of Kolar, for example, has an Ashtadikpala Aradhana, which is in Telugu. It is not in Sanskrit. It is not in Kannada. It's in Telugu. So it was important to acknowledge that migration which had happened, and also that the caste location of dancers in Bangalore was both dramatically different in its identification and its politics from the IFA community. So that was the first thing, that it was important to make this distinction between Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. But the second thing was that I was in a unique position because there are no Telugu Naidu practitioners of the art form who are, Mr. Radhakrishna is still alive, thankfully, but is not in a position to recall any of the history or to actually become a primary source. So there was nobody other than students or students of the tradition who would have been able to tell me about the caste experience of being a Telugu Naidu dancer in the landscape of Karnataka. So I was also kind of trying to understand the community from the outside, both historically as well as being cut off temporally from them. And that was a very different experience than, for example, the IFA community, which has many descendants who are thriving, who have this caste location even today and have this caste identity politics even today. So that's kind of what I want to say about it.
Okay, thanks. The next question, actually, there are two questions, but the same person has asked them. So I'm going to join the two. One, of course, they want to know, will you put this performance online? Are you going to look at an online version of it? I guess as we look to the future and we have no idea when we're going to be able to be in physical spaces together, that is something that I guess everybody will ask you.
Right.
What is the afterlife of this? Is there an online afterlife of this project? Right. And the other question connected to this asked by the same person is, what did you learn about yourself through the research and production? Is there something specific you learned about yourself?
Yeah, obviously, it was a very humbling exercise in checking my privilege. But let me first answer the online question. The original plan was to share Sundara online, but it is an 1.5-hour long production with almost all original music, and it becomes very, very hard because most of us in the dance community know that music is just lifted and stolen, left, right, and center. So I have been struggling with whether or not this production will have an online afterlife. We will have a making of video, which is coming out soon. And we will also be continuously posting clips and keeping the research element alive. We do want to tour with it. We do want to travel with it, but I'm not sure whether the whole thing will ever be up online. So that's the answer to that. In terms of myself, yeah, it was a humbling exercise in checking my privilege. But I also felt that for me, the production was about making sure that both the classical and the traditional music of Bharatanatyam and the music that comes from the Nadaswaram and tabla players from the Telugu Naidu community, the artists who played for the production were from that community as well, but had nothing to do with dance. So unfortunately, they weren't resource people for the dance aspect. But it was important for me physically to stage them in a way where it was symmetrical, where the classical artists were on one side and the Nadaswaram and tabla artists were on the other side. So it was also a visual indicator that the politics that had gone behind Sundara was much more than just something that we all talk about and it's all up in the air. It's also visually present for all of us to see. So,
thanks, Gayathri. Actually, you've already answered a little bit of the last question, the next question. I see there are two more after that already. Is that what is next on the journey for Sundara? both the production as well as Sani. For the production, I guess you already shared online the stuff that you're going to do. But the story of Sani, are you looking at? I guess, I mean, people are asking books, films.
I would love to publish a book. If you know someone who would like to help me publish my book, please get in touch with me. GayathriIyerOfficial@gmail.com. I'm more than happy to write a book. I've thought about it because I think the research is all there. So it would be great to tell this story as a book.
Okay. Did you try to work with dancers from the courtesan community? I guess this is a question that's coming with reference to this particular piece. And there was also a question about how did you choose the piece to choreograph? Like, how did you choose that this is the piece that I will choreograph?
So the repertoire selection took me one entire year. And it was because I didn't want to screw up this portion of it. I didn't want to either dance something that was going to be inappropriate.
So are they little pieces, or is that one piece that
so it is little pieces tied together through the thread of theater. So you have a contemporary character who's finds himself in the temple, and the voice of Venkatasundara Sani kind of comes out to him, and then he has this conversation with her. So it is little pieces, but it was very important for me, A, to select repertoire that would be appropriate, but B, to also select repertoire that I could do justice to as an artist, because there's also the question of feasibility when you're staging a production. It has to be entertaining, all of those things. And so repertoire selection took me a while because, one, it had to represent the cosmopolitan culture of Bangalore. So the production itself has a piece in Sanskrit, has a piece in Kannada, has a piece in Telugu, and a piece in Tamil, because those were the communities that were living in Bangalore at the time. And secondly, the production has both bhakti-oriented pieces, which are mostly devotional, and Venkatasundara Sani's personal devotional relationship with Alsur Someshwara, but also, as I mentioned earlier, conversational pieces, casual pieces that are humorous. There's one piece that is something called a Ninda Stuti, where the character is insulting the god for humorous purposes. It's a type of bhakti. And that you can only do if you're so close to someone. You would only make fun of someone you're that close to. So those were the considerations for me. And did I work with any courtesans? As I mentioned earlier, there are no Telugu Naidu courtesan descendants available who were, who existed in a research space to work with me on history and embodiment. But I have spoken to courtesans, or rather descendants of the courtesan community from other Bharatanatyam and Kuchipudi traditions, most notably Dr. Yashoda Thakur, and also a few people from the ISA community. But it's, I think what is important is to distinguish that this is also different from those things.
There's one question about, you are an academic, you're an art historian, a dance historian, and you are a practitioner, you're a dancer. And how do these different beings in you inform your work, contribute to each other? But the question is about that, but I'm also feeling do they also bring in contradictions sometimes?
All the time.
So if you can just share this, being in these multiple places, because often mostly we find people in one space or the other. And people who inhabit multiple places, say of theory, of practice, of activism, of different kinds, do bring in new things to each of those spaces, but are also within themselves often asking questions about their being in these spaces, right? So how do you experience it?
So for me, the first time I went to the Alsur Someshwara temple, I visited as an art historian. And I've actually written a paper on the Alsur Someshwara temple as an art historian. So for me, my immediate approach is how do stone and flesh have a conversation? That's always the great dichotomy in my mind. What is it about this space that makes me move, that facilitates movement? And it could be the nature of sculpture, it could be the way the space is structured, it could be all of those things. But I think the largest contradictions or the voices of dissent happen when you're trying to look at something still and picture how it would have been if it was moving. So whether that's
I was very enamored with your, just to interject, because you say something very beautiful, and I think your PhD thesis also, it's about stone and flesh, right?
right.
I wanted to ask you, do you see stone as the flesh of time,
And I see flesh also as the soul.
as stone that
So,
will become? Yeah.
I am the tradition. It's very problematic that the tradition is housed in my body, but I am the tradition as much as the stone is the tradition. So I think when you're working with art, which is ephemeral, and I just had a conversation with someone about this the other day. You know, when we lost Rajan Mishra ji, it was extremely traumatic for me because he's an artist I really admire and look up to. And I said, but the tradition is gone in his body. That's it. I mean, it was in his body and now it's not there because it left. And of course, yeah, you can document it and, you know, all of that, but it's not the same. And that I was acutely aware of because, yes, as an art historian, especially when you see two sculptures of dance, for example, in a sequence, and you try to put them together, your body understands the movement logic. So I can say, oh, okay, I can get from this still posture to this still posture by moving like this.
So the dynamic between the two is what the body tells you.
Is what the body tells you, but that's also problematic because that there's movement bias there also. That body has been trained in a certain way. There's
also the body has a certain caste, class consciousness that it cannot come out of, and time consciousness as well. So the body is a contemporary body. It's today's body, right? Which is telling you how to move.
Which is why I feel like making sure that my body was large enough to represent accurately represent bodies of that time was a really important artistic decision because I knew it affected the way I move. You know, I knew that it would be a physical barrier. It's not theoretical. I cannot do certain things if my body is shaped in a certain way. And so that was important. It was very important to have that physical anchoring in some ways to the style, to the space, to the time. So yeah, but it's always, a fight with the voices in my head. So
I think we have, I have one last question, which is more a programmatic question. And this, I specifically ask you because there also may be listeners today who are artists, who are thinking of projects and who may apply to us in the future. And we do want them to think through these things. So it's going back a little bit to when you were applying, and you could have applied to the production grants that we had or the research grants you had. You chose Project 560, which was a very city-based kind of program. How do you see this relating? I mean, other than the obvious thing that this is based in Bangalore, but do you see a deeper connection with the city, or do you see this as part of something that the city has lost or has been erased from the city's understood history or more discussed history? Why was it important for you that this was part of our city program? And a little bit of thinking how you went about that.
So I mean, it's a great question because I knew I could apply to arts research. I could have applied to the production grant program. And I knew that at some level, the project was strong enough to survive in any one of these programs. But it was important to me because the more people I spoke to, the more people were like, Venkatasundara who? And I knew that it would become a landmark piece of research for the city, but also for, when we think about the IFA archives, which I have consulted for my research, you try to, it's not just about depicting the history of the city or depicting a character in the city, but it's about understanding the mise en scène of that time. So if I'm looking at jewelry and textile and archival images, it's not just dance, it's not just temple, it's not just one thing. So I knew that the main character of the project was Bangalore, and everything else was revolving around that.
Yeah.
So
Thanks. That's okay. Oh, one more question has come up. So yeah, probably we'll take that one and then maybe end today's conversation. This is any preferred temple space that Gayatri would want to perform in? I mean, this is being asked by somebody, and I hope whoever you're asking this question, you're asking it and you will ensure you make it possible for Gayatri to do what she
yeah.
wants to do. Otherwise, why are you asking us? Yeah.
I
I put
have
the onus back on him. Yeah.
I have been fortunate enough, me and my musicians actually went to
Hmm.
the production
Hmm.
to just sort of, take in the environment
Hmm.
and sort of have an introspective moment there. And we got uh, spontaneous permission from the priest to dance right there and then. And we were in like jeans and t-shirt
Hmm.
and to dance right there and then in front of the deity.
Hmm.
And it was really such a moving and unique experience.
Hmm.
Not to be hippie, about it, not about the, any of the spirituality or anything like that, but just to also understand in real time how the aesthetics of the temple works and what you're looking at when you're dancing, where your body is, all of those things. So what temple would I like to dance in? Any temple that will have me. So as you rightly said, Arundhati, back to the person who asked the question, if you're inviting me to a temple, my answer is yes. So
Thanks. Thanks for that, Gayatri. So this is uh, this is where I think we can end our conversation today. Thank you so much for sharing this with us.
thank you.
We all hope that not too far away in the future, we are able to actually experience this live somewhere and
Yes,
maybe a show somewhere.
hopefully
And
soon.
hope to see you continue the work that you are doing on Sani and her life and the many things that you might discover. We've also put here the an Instagram link that you have with the
Yes,
Sundara production. So that's
Sundara,
there
the
already.
production. So we do put some updates there,
Hmm.
historical updates as well about Venkatasundara Sani's life. So please
Yeah.
do follow.
Okay.
And
Yeah. So thank
one
you.
last thing,
Yeah.
Arundhati, I have to thank you personally because I think we were having dinner shortly after the IFA orientation meeting. And you told me, you said, you know what, if you sold out, you'd never be able to live with yourself. And that line just keeps ringing in my mind. So I want to thank you in public in front of everyone for keeping me on the right track and for being such a great support.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, we have an incredible team who does all of it. I'm specifically missing Sumana, who
Yes.
holds this project together. So now Sumana is unwell, but she's getting better. And we hope she's going to be back soon. She's going to listen to this recording as well. And thank you. And to all the audience members who are here. So we are going to do this project showcase at IFA once every month. We don't have the next date yet, but it will certainly be in May. But you will get emails. You will find us on, just follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and you will get to know. Probably around this time next month, we will have another one. And we hope to do these once a month, every month, to bring you the different kinds of incredible work that our grantees and project coordinators are doing across the different programs that we have. So do forward this to your friends so that more and more people can know the kind of work that's going on. Thank you so much for joining us. Please stay safe, take all precautions. If you can, get vaccinated. And please, please don't ever take off that mask. Thank you so much.